things. This was her first experience ever. She sat there for over an hour. The only reason we quit was she had already missed a number of things she was supposed to be going to, and the physical therapist was not about to let her miss the physical therapy, and she was tough. So, you know, we're like, all right, you got to get going. She sat there for over an hour. We filled up 16 or 17 pages of letters, and she didn't want to stop. And remember that she just turned 5 here. She had just left a school that defined her as a behavior problem, as having no attention span. What the hell was going on in that school? You know, what was going on here was an intellectually engaged kid, you know, having fun. Oh, so then we quickly got her into more high-tech stuff, but we never left the low-tech behind. So we got online keyboards going. That was actually one of her first experiences with that. With the head mouse, it's a device where a little mirror gets put. Like, we had to experiment with that, but on her glasses we ended up with, because she could control her head a bit where her hands just weren't going to be useful for a conventional kind of mouse. And so she had then very quickly access to keyboards and control of a computer. And if you control a computer, I mean, the sky's the limit in the world today, right? So what changed for Megan? What changed for her was she all of a sudden encountered, and we were working with the teachers to begin to support them in this shift of paradigms that they had to go through. She entered into a different way of thinking. Let's shed the deficit model that still so dominates human difference. Let's shed that, and let's look at her differences from a perspective of diversity, a perspective of social understanding and cultural understanding. You know, it doesn't deny the very real physical differences that she expressed from most of us. You know, some kids walk and some kids don't. That's an actual difference. But what we make of it and what it means, that's what is key in a kid's life. What does it mean? Segregation, lack of literacy, or does it mean, well, let's get it together here and figure this out? You know, what is the meaning of that difference? So in the social model, yeah, we want kids to learn and read and walk and focus and behave and talk. We want them in the library context to be able to explore resources, to explore technologies and all the amazing stuff that goes on anymore in public libraries. We want them in interaction. And we have certain ways of thinking about how to do that in the most efficient and normal way. But we realize some kids aren't going to meet those ways of doing things. But rather than seeing deficit, let's look at it as let's look at Megan as a representation of the amazing diversity of the human race, you know? And we don't have to lay deficit over her so automatically. What am I doing here? What we can do in this model is, instead of blaming the child, there's something broken about you. Oh, you're not focusing on the task I've just given you for any longer than 30 seconds, and you happen to be throwing it across the room if you can get your hands on the whatever it is in front of you. You know, let's ask questions. And so there's something broken about you. There's something wrong with you. There's, you know, it's that intellectual disability, it's that behavior disorder, it's the, you know, it's whatever it is. Let's ask questions of ourselves, and that's really hard to do, because the stuff that we set up, the libraries you create, the classrooms I've been in, or as a teacher I created, they're wholly rational. You know, they're beautiful, and we put so much energy into them just as they are, because just as they are is just the way they need to be, and it's fully, wholly rational. And so that kid who doesn't fit in that beautiful setting that we've created, you know, that kid, well, what is it to not fit a rational world? Well, you're irrational. You know, I've set this up normal, so you're abnormal. You know, I've set this up for good kids, kids who behave and listen the way I expect them to, so you must be a bad kid. You know, if you don't do things. So when we begin to ask teachers to challenge and question themselves, that's hard to do, because that's what this is all about. is to say, oh, okay, well, Megan, you've had 5 years where nobody thought you could be literate and you've been denied that. You know, let's recognize that you have literally been denied an opportunity to become a literate citizen. So we need to change perhaps how we do things if we're to support you to become a literate citizen. So let's ask questions of ourselves. Let's bring in alternate pencils and low tech. Let's bring in high-tech computer mouses, and you know, let's bring in a wheelchair, but let's make everything accessible to that wheelchair, not just the special ed wing. So let's expand that context, that environment, in a direction that's more responsive to the forms of diversity we encounter. Let's bring that classroom in a more responsive, let's not water down, let's not eliminate anything, let's just bring in ideas and beliefs and patterns of doing things that are more responsive to Megan. And in so doing, you know, we bring in universal design for learning. That's jargon for my field. Some of you might have encountered, yeah. But let's bring in these technologies and these ways of thinking. Let's bring in good teaching. Collaboration is essential. Let's bring in adaptations, differentiation, assistive technology, all those sorts of things into Megan's life. We'll bring that in, and in so doing, she'll become somebody who interacts. She'll become somebody who communicates. Not through talking. I don't know if talking's ever going to be all that useful to her, but she is now, let me just tell you, the end of the story. It's not the end of the story. She's in 3rd grade now, fully included. I don't like to use her as an example of inclusion only because I don't think any kid needs to prove their way in. But there was no longer any rational way of denying her access to general education and her non-disabled peers. There never was. But they used that, well, she belongs over here because she can't really think. But anyway, she's, oh, and she's well above grade level. She's one of the highest performing students now. And in opening up the opportunities for literacy, we open up the opportunity for liberation and for, I mean, she can become the president now. You know, you sit there at the computer, you can control the world. And we apparently vote for just about anybody.
Megan for president.
Yeah, no doubt.
What year does she turn 36? 35.
35. So, anyway, she's fully included. And I'm not vouching for this. This is just a nice little inclusive thing. I'm not vouching for this lesson. This is just a little phonics lesson. She's so far beyond this. And has no need for this drilling around phonics, but it's what everyone was doing. So there, we're back at low tech. It's a little rhyming thing, but the thing I like about this video, the most important thing is coming here in a minute.
Does hop sound like yeah, I would agree.
So she's like, yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
I'll clean up, Christopher. Can you slide down for a minute?
I've got 2 minutes. So the best part of the video, and the whole point of why Megan needs to have access to the full school and everyone needs to have access to her, is that little girl sitting next to her who's become a very close friend of Megan's. You know, this is just normal school. And I watch their hands. I watch their hands and I get emotional. It's presuming competence. So that social model surrounding everything in that is this idea of those teachers around Megan no longer buying into this deficit model, no longer buying into that, but presuming competence in every child. That competence is going to be expressed in a billion different ways. You know, not everyone is going to be the top student in 3rd grade. It just isn't going to happen for everyone. But there is a value, there is a worth, there is an intelligence, and we just have to figure out ways of supporting and fostering that. It's envisioning the citizenship for all, this right to belong, that you have a right to belong, that you have worth, inherent worth, and that you have an imagination. It's also then crafting contexts, classrooms or libraries, for increasingly complex cultural connectedness. So Megan went from somebody really distanced and disconnected to a kid who was making meaning of the world in ever more complex ways. And for her, it's great. It works out that we can see that on tests and stuff like that. It won't always be that way for every kid, but getting them into, with the presumption of competence, into stimulating environments that are interesting, that are exciting, that have kids engaged with one another, exploring the world together. You know, every kid becomes ever more sophisticated and complex when surrounded by that kind of an attitude. And none of this happens without collaboration. You guys can't go back to your libraries, wherever they might be, and succeed with kids or adults who have very complex situations without the support of others around you. People who might know, and we'll talk more about opportunities with technology and things like that, but people who might know a little bit more about, oh, these kinds of systems here, or what's available, or how to get funding, or things like that. I mean, it just doesn't work without collaboration. So on that note, we'll stop and move over to Tess.
Alrighty. I'm going to stand here just because I, unlike you, I'm not just going to speak off the top of my head. I've got a couple notes, just going to make sure I cover things. You're supposed to ask me how I...
Oh, yes.
While she's changing the PowerPoint.
What did you get arrested for?
Interestingly, I did not get arrested at all. So I know a lot of you guys. So I've been working as a children's librarian now for 20 years. And 5 years ago, I had been working for 15 years at that point. I started my doctorate, and I'm still working on it. But anyway, the reason how I got into this area of interest was one of my kids has a disability. And that's a whole other story that some of you know, if you're my friends, you know, and you can certainly read about it in some of my, if you read my dissertation when it's published, that story is in there. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but basically, what I started to do as a practitioner was wonder where kids like Caleb were, because he was in my family and I knew he wasn't the only kid in the community who was like him, and I kind of saw kids every day, hundreds and hundreds of kids over the years, and I didn't really see many kids who were like him. So I started to wonder how good a job we were doing in terms of inviting and including kids like him and his friends that he eventually made through special groups and things like that, right? So that's why I started. And I did, you know, he went to an inclusive elementary school, and I picked it out of a lineup of schools, and that was the one that he went to, and he had a very inclusive schooling experience, so none of the special segregated thing until, that's a whole other story with high school. But anyway, he's 20 now, so that's a whole other story. But anyway, so really what I'm gonna get right into what we're talking about when we're talking about inclusion, and really what we mean when we say inclusion, and what that means to us as practitioners. So, where's that clicker?
Yes.
So which one do I
That's
do?
the right, or the left.
Okay, go to the next slide. So there's two viewpoints. If you start thinking about libraries and inclusion, there's two viewpoints. We're doing great already, we're doing great stuff, and we're not doing enough. So those are totally, fairly opposed, but they're both actually true at the same time. We are actually doing quite well, but we tend to think that we're doing better than we actually are. So if I can break that down a little bit, we tend to think we're doing a bit better than we actually are. I have a whole bunch of other notes, but and some of this I can wrap up a little bit later. But basically, we work in institutions that tend to have things, narratives around inclusion and inclusive and welcoming for all in our mission statement. So VPL, if you want to whip out your your business card, or you want to look on the website, it'll say something like that. And most of you in public libraries, it will say something that alludes to being welcome and inclusive for all. But given that we have a harmful history of exclusion for people with disabilities, that Chris has alluded to, the kids going to preschools that you called strange, and before they were even specialized preschools, these children were not in preschools at all, they were often institutionalized. So there's a doubt in my mind that just because we say we're inclusive, just because we want to be, that we could possibly be, without doing this very hard work that has undergone in public education, which is still a work in progress. So so I can say that for a fact, as a parent of a child with a disability, it's still a work in progress. It's not a done deal. So what I'm looking at is the work that public libraries and any kind of library really needs to do to really become inclusive beyond just stating that we are. So in my, one of the things that I've done for my study is look at how we talk about inclusive, or what we think of as inclusive programs and services in children's libraries. And so if you read this magazine, or this journal, Children in Libraries, or public libraries, or American libraries, or Yakking even, you will probably see articles that are written by practitioners about programs that they have designed to meet a need in the community. And sometimes they're called inclusive, and sometimes they're not. So what often happens, this is little, anecdotally, and I've seen this in articles, is that parents will approach libraries and say, I can't come to story time because X, Y, Z, can I have a special program? And this is the same thing they did in education. They really said, we're done with this institution stuff, forget it, we want our kids to go to school. And so they started with special, self-contained special ed classrooms. And it's really heartening to see that parents will do that, and that libraries will respond with special programs for special kids. But I don't think that's enough. So that comes under the we're not doing enough. It is we're doing great. These might be great programs, but we're really not doing enough. If our goal is to be inclusive, we really need to look at why were our other programs not successful? What was going on with that? That's sort of where we need to look. And of course, there's not very much research to go on, because people will write about their programs, but no one's really conducting research in unlike in public education and in schools of education all over North America, there's research conducted right in classrooms. You just saw some. That's not happened in the library world. So my goal was to kind of try to fill some of that gap. So that's sort of what I'm doing. I think what happens in library and information studies is that once we finish our degrees, we just go out into the practice, and then the practice leads the practice, rather than really, and so a parent will ask us to do something, or a community group or whatever will do it, and there's no time to kind of think about what it is we're doing in terms of sort of where are we going as a society, and are we, is this what we should be doing? So there's the intention to serve people, and we are intending to serve children with disabilities as well as we can. There's that intention is there, but the knowledge of how we're actually going to do that, and how we should perhaps do that, and where to draw expertise is missing. And that's why I was so happy that we could get Chris here, because this is an example of what happened in public education, and these are, these are the kinds of steps we have to do. It's fairly involved. So my study came, really the rationale is that we don't actually know a whole lot, other than anecdotally, what's happening for children with disabilities and how they participate in our early literacy activities. So we heard about Megan, who was deprived of the kinds of things that we take for granted for those typical kids, where they can come to story time and they can participate in play groups and all of that kind of stuff. But we don't know enough about them to say, how are they accessing? And so my feeling is that they are likely to remain excluded. And so if they remain excluded, they don't get the benefits of the things that we already know are beneficial. So we need to figure out how to, you know, how to make that, how to